Welcome back to Tide Pods, the first episode back in a while. I know we've taken a little bit of a hiatus, but we're back, and we picked a good time to return naturally with spring practice coming up for Alabama here on Monday. Recording this on a weird February 29th because it's a leap year, so this might be the only Tide Pod you ever hear on a leap year. Who knows? But anyway, Tony, you're back. We're gonna preview Alabama's positions, just dive into kind of the biggest questions right now ahead of spring camp that we think, we might get a glimpse into answering. I know you're very excited first and foremost because media is now going to be able to watch practice, have a little bit more access. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but just, since we've talked last, what have you noticed about this Alabama team, kind of some of the early developments?
Yeah, back to the media thing. I mean, Jesus, it doesn't seem real. Is this real life? I mean,
Hmm.
we not only get to see practice, we're going to have interviews on the practice field. Like, what is, and we're talking to assistant coaches. I mean, a few of the assistant coaches have already, got on radio stations. So we've gotten to hear from them. I mean, typically, and, people that have followed Alabama know that we just have them right before fall camp and during the bowl games, and that's it, and then we don't get to talk to assistants anymore. So getting to talk to assistants on a weekly basis, it seems like, is going to be fun because I think you're going to get more insight into the position groups. We would never get to talk to, let's say, like a position coach, only the offensive or defensive coordinator. So talking to a guy like Jamarcus Shepard, who's going to be the receivers coach, I think it's going to be great. I think it's going to kind of like give you some insight onto the development of each unit. So I'm pretty excited about it. We're running a little, preview of each position group kind of through the lens of the assistants coordinator or the position coaches on the site. So that's fun. Yeah, it's a exciting time for Alabama because this is going to be a really key spring camp with a lot of questions, and then there's also just it looks like we might be able to get some more of those answered than maybe in previous years where things were a little bit shut tight and clamped.
Yeah, it's a new time. It's an exciting time. Get to know some more of the characters around who's developing, the guys that you're going to see on the field in the fall. So definitely a good time to subscribe as well for those position previews and everything spring camp. But Tony, without any more delay, let's dive into it. We're going to talk each position group, kind of lumped a couple together, just because some of the questions are pretty similar. But we'll start, of course, with Jalen Milrow in the quarterback room. And you've had some interesting takes on this. I think we've talked, whether it's off air on previous podcasts. I think the biggest question this offseason, Alabama's quarterback room is pretty deep. Milrow, Ty Simpson, Dylan Lonergan, Austin Mack, who they brought in from Washington. And I think an interesting question, Tony, is will there be any sort of a quarterback battle, or is that, Milrow's job totally good to go? Everyone else is kind of playing to be the best backup.
Yeah, I think Milrow will be given every single opportunity to win the job outright without even really a lot of drama. I think it's that the drama could come in, if he's not able to pick up the system or pick up the new scheme and all the things that Kalen DeBoer is going to require from his quarterback. And I think he's capable of doing it. The other thing you got to think about too is, yes, does Jalen have a lot of room for improvement as a passer? Of course, but he's also getting one of the best offensive minds kind of getting to work with him. So you got to give Kalen DeBoer credit. If Kalen DeBoer's system is that great, you also got to give him the credit for being able to develop players. And I think that's something that he can do with Jalen Milrow. If that doesn't happen, yes, there will be a quarterback battle. I don't think this is Jalen Milrow's job, regardless. I think that he needs to kind of like he'll have that opportunity to prove it. And if he doesn't, I think this becomes a quarterback battle. And then, I think a guy that's really picking up steam is Austin Mack, the transfer from Washington. He's the only quarterback in the room that knows the offense, knows the scheme. He enrolled early to join Washington last year. While he didn't play a snap, he did learn, the DeBoer system, and he learned it behind Michael Penix. So he's got a really good mentor in there. If things go awry, I think, I'd almost put him because of that. I'd almost put him neck and neck with Ty Simpson, who pushed Milrow to the end last offseason. So those three, and then, you really can't even count out Dylan Lonergan because I think he's a really talented guy as well. So you've got four guys that if it does become a quarterback battle, it becomes a really intense quarterback battle. But I don't think day one. I think day one you'd almost call Jalen Milrow the returning starter. I don't think I don't think it's a completely open battle. I think Jalen Miller will be given the opportunity to slam the door early. If he can't do it, then I think it becomes battle.
Yeah, definitely. I want to ask too, like, is it in such a loaded quarterback room? Could you see maybe not a Mac considering he just transferred in, but someone like Lonergan or Simpson, if maybe they kind of sputter in spring camp and don't see a future, as the starter, even in the post Milrow era, could you see one of those guys maybe hitting the portal in that spring window potentially, or do you think Alabama will keep all four of those guys?
It depends, and Alabama might have to be a little bit careful with how it balances everything, right? Because if you totally give the job to Jalen Milrow, what incentive does Ty Simpson have to stay? And he might,
Hmm.
want to leave. He's a guy you could see, the clock could be ticking for him. He'll be a redshirt sophomore this year. If he knows he's not going to play, then he only has 2 more years. He might want to try to leave, and you wouldn't really blame him. The same thing with like Dylan Lonergan would be in that camp too. One of those two, you would think if Jalen Milrow wins, would probably leave, or you could at least see why they would leave. Then if like let's say somebody like Austin Mack or Ty Simpson, one of those two, if one of them leaves, I think you could definitely see Jalen Milrow leave. I mean, there's no world where Jalen Milrow is just going to go from being the leading Heisman vote getter, leading returning Heisman vote getter, to being a backup and just be okay with it. Not in today's uh, landscape. I'm not. That's not a knock against Jalen Milrow. That's just I don't realistically see that happening with any
Hmm.
quarterback. And I like once again, how could you blame Jalen Milrow if that was to happen? So I wouldn't be surprised if there was some attrition after spring. If everything's close, though, then you might be able to keep them through the fall, and then maybe the politically do things a little bit to keep things a little bit closer, so that you don't have to worry about losing them. I don't know, but I do think that I am kind of expecting at least one of them to leave, and who knows? Maybe Alabama brings in a kind of like more experienced guy, like like they were going to do with Garner Minshew uh,
Hmm.
before he went to Washington State. Somebody like that where it comes from a small school would come in knowing that he's going to be the backup, or just a mentor, somebody that maybe wants to just get into coaching one day. Maybe they bring in kind of a walk on like that if one of those guys leaves. Who knows? But yeah, I think in today's landscape, it's kind of foolish to think that you have four quarterbacks this good, and they're all three of them are going to be okay with being backups.
Yeah, for sure. I think the overarching theme is it could be more of a shakeup than maybe people realize if this stays closer and some of these other guys continue to push Jalen Milrow. And there's a lot of talent there. That room is very deep. So plenty to watch for there in the quarterback room. Let's move on to running backs, and you kind of lump the receivers maybe into this question as well. But Tony, obviously, Kalen DeBoer's offense, plenty's talked about it. And in addition to all the stuff Penix and the receivers did, they also had an 1,000-yard rusher in Dylan Johnson. And now DeBoer comes into an Alabama room. It's losing Jace McClellan. Justice Hayes and Jam Miller have a lot of talent. Justice and Jam, of course, the theme going around. Everyone wants to see that trademarked or whatever as a running back duo. But do you think, in kind of your way too early prediction, that one of those guys will emerge as an 1,000-yard rusher when the season comes to an end?
I think it depends on if there's another J in there. I think if
Hmm.
it's Justin, Jim, and Jalen, probably not. And that's just because I think Jalen's such a weapon with his legs in his own right. So if you're he's going to steal the rushing yards from a running back. And I'm not saying he's just going to come in and be this run only quarterback, but that's just gonna any mobile quarterback, anybody with as deadly of legs as Jalen Milrow will come in and take yards away. So if he's the quarterback, it's almost it's hard if you're sharing the running back role in any capacity, and you also have a mobile quarterback. It's hard to have that 1,000-yard runner. Let's just say like in a world where Jalen Milrow just decides he's not going to run, just hypothetically, and then you have those two guys. I think you're definitely capable of having 1,000-yard runner. I mean, Dylan Johnson had it last year. Both of those guys are capable. I think for Justice Haynes, if he's able to improve in his pass block, which is going to be so important in this offense where you're going to be kind of lining up out of the shotgun, you're going to be asked to pass block a lot, and that's going to be a big thing in terms of getting playing time. If he's able to kind of become that more complete back, his ceiling is just off the charts. And the fact that he stayed at Alabama is that was a big off season win for Alabama. So I think he has the potential. I think Jam Miller also has the potential. The only thing I could see is like maybe you have like two 800-yard rushers, or an
Hmm.
800-yard rusher and a 700-yard rusher. So But I do think both of those guys are capable of 1,000 yards. At the moment, I would go like if we set like an over under, I would go under only because you have I don't know how the reps will be shared, and you have Jalen Milrow in there who could definitely take away some rushing yards. But in terms of capability, sure, like both of those guys
Mhm.
are 1,000 yard backs in terms of talent.
Yeah, I think you just use the wealth of talent you have, and if one of them breaks out, they break out, and then you see where you go from there. And yeah, that's another big question with Milrow. Should he, retain that starting job and be an active part of the roster? How much does DeBoer use his legs? That's been a much talked about, thing where you have Penix way more of a pocket passer, you know, way more reliant on his arm. How much does DeBoer mix in Milrow's legs versus using those running backs? What about the receivers, Tony? That's a position that's had, a lot of turnover. Some guys, especially Isaiah Bond, leaving that, fans certainly didn't want to see. But bringing in, I know Jermaine Bernard from Washington's a pretty interesting name, had more of a bit part role, but it was a very deep Washington receiver room. And now he joins DeBoer. And then, of course, there's Ryan Williams coming in as a freshman. What are your expectations for those two guys? I know Shepard, Jamarcus Shepard, the wide receivers coach, went on the radio and talked a little bit about them. And then same question. Can Alabama have an 1,000-yard receiver this season?
I think they definitely can and probably will have 1,000 yard receiver just because if you look the last 2 years at Washington, they had two 1,000 yard receivers. I just couldn't name you who they're going to be. I think they could be any of like five people. Jeremy Bernard's probably a good bet. He knows the offense. He had like 300 or 400 yards. And they had some injury. They had an injury to McMillan, so he played a little bit more. I think that he's a candidate right there for 1,000 yards. He's a guy that does a lot of stuff. He's going to stay on the field because he can block. You could probably play inside, outside. I mean, he's kind of like Kendrick Law, where they put him at running back on special packages as well. So he's a do it all guy. I mentioned Kendrick Law too with that group. Those are guys that are going to be like can be used in gadgets, and you can like use them to get extra yards, and maybe that helps them get more opportunities. Um, I think a guy that nobody's really talking about is Kobe Prentice, and that's an interesting one too. Is like who's going to man that slot position off the bat? And everyone wants to say Ryan Williams. Ryan Williams is not going to join until the fall, and that's an interesting thing as well because like I think Ryan Williams has the most talent out of anybody in this receiving core, and he's the guy that you'd circle as like, oh man, he can come in, year one and have 1,000 yards, and I think that's definitely possible. But I also think you got a guy like Kobe Prentice, who like nobody's talking about, is a really good athlete and somebody that DeBoer could really, you look at the level of talent, and I'm not dissing on any of the Washington receivers because plenty of those guys are talented coming out of high school, but you look at that level and you look at some of the level of the Alabama guys, and you're like, well, if he can do that at Washington, he can do that at Alabama. And I think a guy like Kobe Prentice could come out of nowhere. He's a guy that's just kind of not quite lived up to his early freshman hype, and I think it's there for him. So this offense, I could see a guy like that really breaking out. Jalen Hale is a guy that they don't really have that big receiver, that Rome Odunze kind of guy.
Mhm.
Jalen Hale is kind of the closest thing they've got to that, and a guy that can make contested catches downfield. And look, the last 2 years, Rome Odunze was the big guy in Washington's offense. So if that's what he needs, I mean, Jalen Hale's a guy that could break out. So I mean, what did I name? Probably five right there. Uh, I think any one of those five guys can be 1,000 yard receiver. It's just a matter of kind of how it all bounces together. But you talked about the running backs, and whoever gets hot, I think that's what's gonna happen is you're gonna find somebody that's gonna build a rhythm with the quarterback, and it's gonna go from there. And but I do think that Alabama will have one of the deepest receiving cores, and so like that they're I think a go-to guy is going to develop, but I think there's going to be plenty of options, and I think it's just going to be a really deadly part of the offense.
Yeah, I think the fact that it's hard to name one is a good sign for, that you're not totally relying on a 17-year-old Ryan Williams from, to be like instantly you're 1,000-yard receiver. If he is that and he has the potential to be that, that's fantastic. But yeah, if Kobe Prentice or if Jeremy Bernard can come in and be that guy, and who knows if it really works for DeBoer like it did with Washington, everything clicks. They could have two of them, like you just said, and yeah, with how
Yeah,
great that room is.
and they brought in some talented receivers in this year's class. Like, what if it's like a Bubba Hampton and he comes out of like nowhere, and if it's somebody like that. that's just it could be a lot, so it's exciting. And I think that's the thing you look at, Alabama was already wide receiver you, and you're coming in an offense that is super wide receiver friendly. It's just gonna. Yeah, if I was a wide receiver, I'd love to play in this offense, and I think that um, that's a big reason. You look at a guy like Ryan Williams, and I'm sure he's salivating right now as well.
Yeah, no doubt. And I don't know. I think from a getting to know the assistant standpoint, Jamarcus Shepard might be an early candidate for someone that the fans are going to really fall in love with when you guys start writing about him. Just from his radio interviews, I like that he calls them takers, the
Oh
wide
yeah, this is not
receivers.
even
That's
the
a
wide
fun.
receiver. We're not even talking about the wide receiver unit. We're talking about the takers unit.
Yeah, the
There's
takers
nothing
unit.
passive. There's nothing passive about the way he wants his wide receivers to play. And look, even that statement right there, you look at he's got some players that can do that. I mean, Jeremy Bernard's a guy that's like a very aggressive guy. Um, uh, Kendrick Law is another guy. Kendrick Law and Jeremy Bernard, I mean, they're not the exact same player, but they're so to me when I look at them, I'm like, oh, these guys are, you know, they're really good. The only thing is like, are they the same player and can they complement each other on the field? I think they can, but that's the only question I would have about those two. And you look at Jalen Hale is another guy that I think is another kind of big guy that could be aggressive as well. So when you look at takers, I think this could be a really exciting unit.
Alabama's plenty of takers, plenty of receivers they want. Who's going to fit Shepard's identity? I know he talked about Williams too, and said he's already kind of impressed with his attitude and all that stuff as a 17-year-old. So
Yeah, and
plenty to look forward to. Yeah.
Williams is not your typical 17-year-old.
Mhm.
He's coming in with a lot of football knowledge and a lot of maturity, and a guy that really trusts
Professionalism.
himself. Yeah. So I think that I talked about how it's going to be difficult for him to adjust early on because he doesn't have a spring camp. Typically, yes, that is the case. But if anyone can do it, I think Ryan Williams is better positioned than most 17-year-old freshmen that missed out on spring camp.
No doubt. Let's look at the trenches now, and on the offensive line side, which might maybe has the most, I don't know, yin and yang factor to it, for lack of a better term, like good and then questionable. I'll turn first to the good. Tony, we saw this. This came from PFF. They ranked their top returning interior offensive linemen. They ranked the top 10 coming into 2024. Alabama had three of them. Their center, Parker Brailsford, was at 1. They had Tyler Booker at 3, and then Jaden Roberts at 7. That's great, and I think that's good enough to have its own discussion before we talk about maybe the questionable outside blocking that Alabama is going to need to address here this offseason. But plenty of talent coming in. I know you're very bullish, especially on Brailsford, as clearly is Max Chadwick from PFF.
Yeah, I mean, you look at him, he was the center on the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line at Washington, another guy that's going to know the scheme. So I think that that's, all that's very important. When you look at those three with him and Booker and Roberts, that's probably not only the best interior offensive line in the nation, it has a chance to be the best position group, period, in the nation. When you look at that, I mean, you talked about three guys in the top 7 of their position. That's, I mean, if we're going by that metric, you'd be hard pressed to find any kind of position group that has the top 7 of anything. So, 3 of the top 7 of anything. So, I think that that's kind of an interesting way to look at it. Now, the tackle position when we get to that is a huge hole. So it's kind of
Yeah.
you're right, they do yin and yang. But I think if you got Tyler Booker is probably Alabama's best returning lineman. You've got Jaden Roberts, who's the strongest person on the team. Parker Brailsford's the knock on him is that he's undersized, but it didn't seem to bother him at Washington. I do think he probably wants to put on a little bit of weight to play in the SEC. It's just a bigger league. But then again, I think you got to look at the way the offense is working, and if they made it work with a faster, not as bulky guy, I think that might just be what you need from the offense. I think so much we get lost in the height and weight of offensive linemen. Look at the NFL. I mean, the NFL doesn't have 340-pound linemen across the board. It's not as big as necessarily what Alabama's been putting out. And I think if you get guys that are quicker, that are just as strong, the extra bulk is not always a good thing. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing either. You got guys like Tyler Booker's pretty big dude. That's not a bad thing. But I do think that it's not as much of a necessity as people make it out to be. So I really like Brailsford. I think Booker's the best offensive lineman. And I think Roberts has a lot of potential. The thing about Roberts, I think he needs to kind of like get better at just the nuances of the game.
Hmm.
He's just kind of right at his first season as a starter, which is kind of like I'm a big dude and I'm stronger than you. But I think to take it to the next level, I think he's kind of gonna get more experience. That's what you would expect in a second year starter, anyways. So I think they're in good shape with those three. The only thing I could see where that like doesn't work out is do you have to, and we'll get onto this
Yeah.
next, you have to move Tyler Booker out to tackle in order, but that could obviously then you have to plug somebody else in his hole. But if those three end up being the three interior offensive linemen at Alabama, expect a lot of runs up the middle because they'll be open.
Yeah, that could play into the 1,000-yard rusher argument if someone
Sure.
breaks out there. But yeah, that's the big question. You just touched on it, is the tackle position, and who kind of steps up there. You've got Elijah Pritchett, Miles McVay, Willikin Fromby, Niquil Bertrand. I don't know if I missed anybody else, but not a whole lot of experience coming back there from a year ago. And that was going to be my question: is do they kick Tyler Booker out to tackle? How does Alabama figure that situation out? Is it someone comes in the spring portal? What do you think is going to happen there to address the tackle needs?
Yeah, I kind of think that Alabama's at least one of Alabama's tackles is not on the team right now. I think
Hmm.
that that they'll probably, if they can get even a guy like when they got Tyler Steele, sorry, not Steele, Tyler Steen from Vanderbilt, a couple years ago, where he was just an established guy, yeah, a veteran from an SEC team. If they can get somebody of that level that is like might not win, an award at Alabama, but it's going to be a dependable guy that you can stick at the tackle position and know that he's reliable and he can handle it. I think that's you're going to want to get that just for the stability of it. And I think they're going to be able to find someone. I don't know who it's going to be, but I think you know the spring window is going to open up after camp. People are going to see Alabama's offense is really shiny and fun, and that they probably need a tackle. And I think if I'm a tackle, I'm kind of looking at that. And I'm like, well, maybe that could be a great opportunity for me to shine in this offense. So I'd keep an eye on the portal for one of those spots. And then I think Elijah Pritchett is a guy that pushed Caden Proctor. It's kind of interesting that Caden Proctor struggled so much during his freshman season, especially early, and that Pritchett wasn't able to beat him out, so that's a little bit discouraging. But Pritchett's also had some things off the field that kind of make you scratch your head.
Hmm.
But I think that you look at him, he's got to be the favorite to land one of those spots right now. And he's a 5-star kid himself, who's a top tackle in his class. And if he puts it all together, I think that, he could really have a breakout year. So I think Alabama is really kind of relying on him to kind of do that. And if they can, I mean, all of a sudden, from a talent perspective, you get him, and then you can fill out that last tackle spot. You have a really good offensive line, perhaps a better offensive line than you did last year. Definitely the potential to have a better offensive line than you did last year. You look currently at that other right tackle spot, or I'm assuming you're going to put Pritchett at left tackle. Wilkin Formby or Miles McVay. I think maybe in Saban's old offenses where they had bigger offensive linemen, I would go McVay. I kind of like Wilkin Formby as the more athletic of the two, maybe better at the pass blocking, kind of more set up for what this offense is designed to do. I think it's still pretty even, but if you asked me between those two at the moment, I'd probably go Formby. I think just based in this offense. But I think we're gonna have to see how they're gonna produce in spring camp before we kind of make that evaluation final.
Yeah, a lot of just question marks, which that they're gonna have to address. Possibly the biggest need on this team to figure out. Also, Wilkin Fromby, best NIL deal, if I remember correctly. He's got
Yeah,
the
he's got the taco casa where he
yeah.
eats like 15 pounds of food. I don't believe that he eats that. I think he's just trying to sell some tacos there because whatever that Fantastic Four. I actually had a buddy who said that he went to Taco Casa and tried to order the Fantastic Four, and they asked him, and I don't ask me to repeat what the Fantastic Four is, but it's like a lot of food. Um, but he asked to like I guess he wanted to try to eat what Wilkin Forby said in that
Mhm.
commercial, and they looked at him like he was crazy. Like they're like, "What is that?" So I don't even know if that's a real thing. I think it's just something that Wilkin Forby was like,
It's
"I
all
can eat a
stunt.
lot of food. Let me try to sell it all at once," kind of thing. So we'll
Interesting.
see.
He's pulling the Matthew Judon where he said body built by Taco Bell in his player intro one time in the NFL. Will Conformi is going to make the league and say body built by Taco
Maybe he
Casa
is.
one day.
We
Who knows?
need to have an article where we try to tackle in one sitting all the food that Will Conformi says he eats in that commercial. I wish I had it in front of me because it's a lot of
Yeah, that'll be something that can be that can be an article down the line. We'll see. Yeah, so plenty of questions to dive into there, other than what Will Conformity's go-to order is. But staying in the trenches, let's go to the other side of the ball now, Tony. Defensive line, we'll lump kind of the edge rushers in there. With Kane Womack's system, there's plenty to watch for there with what he's going to kind of instill. But I think the big question is pass rush and pressure on the quarterback. Who are some of the guys that could emerge there? Obviously, Justin Aboybe, Dallas Turner, and Chris Braswell all gone. That's a lot to replace. What are you looking for in terms of pass rush as Womack puts in his system, and some names that could emerge there?
Yeah, you mentioned, I mean, it's hard to replace. I think you could be replacing 2 first rounders, and if Chris Braswell slides into the first round, obviously Dallas Turner's the first rounder, so that's tough. And then you've got a guy like Justin Aboybe, who's established himself as a real like kind of underrated part of Alabama's defense last year. So the replacing that trio is going to be tough. I do like some of the people that Alabama brought in, are like one of the persons that Alabama brought in is LT Overton, and I think he kind of fits that bandit role, which is going to be, it used to be Alabama had like 2 definite outside linebackers that they kind of put in there, and basically serves as defensive ends. This bandit role is kind of like more of a hybrid between an outside linebacker and a defensive end. And LT Overton's kind of that guy. I think he's 6'5", 270, 265 pounds, something like that. And I like him. He's a 5-star kid. They got him from Texas A&M, and Texas A&M had that deep defensive line, so he didn't really get the chance to like break into that. I think he's got a lot of potential, so I like him at that bandit role. Jamarian Latham's another guy that he'll compete for that bandit role as well. In the middle of the defense, I think, the defensive line, I think Alabama is really strong, and I think they're going to benefit from having, a Tim Smith come back for depth. I think that was a guy that you were kind of worried that maybe Alabama would lose, but they return him. So you've got, nose tackle Tim Keenan, a defensive tackle Jaheim Otis, and then you've got a guy like Tim Smith for rotation. You also got guys like Damon Payne. So they're deep there. In terms of pass rushing, I'm not sure, it's tough to generate that up the middle, but you have so much experience and depth there that maybe you can get more, inside presence, which is obviously really big when you're rushing the passer. That's how you can really affect the quarterback, is through the inside. So I like that. And then the other position is that Wolf position. That's going to be more like what Alabama is kind of used to in its edge rushers. I think Quindarius Robinson's the guy that's returning. He's been behind a ton of, top end caliber. You got Will Anderson, you've got Dallas Turner, you've got Chris Braswell. So he hasn't played much, but I mean, those are all first round kind of caliber guys. We'll see how Quindarius Robinson does in his first year. If he doesn't do it, I think you look at a guy like Keon Keeley or Yancey Pierre. Those are 2 5-star guys that didn't play last year at all. They weren't really ready last year. As I think a lot of people expected them to be instant impact guys. And from the sounds of it, they needed that year of development, but they've got a lot of talent on that team. So I think that it's one of those 5-star guys, maybe Stephen Quay Russaw, another kind of 5-star guy that didn't play last year. They've got a bunch of young, really talented players that if they can step up, can kind of answer the bell for some of that, loss of pass rush. It's kind of unknown from the edge rusher position,
Yeah.
and then really stable in the inside.
Yeah, that's I think going to be interesting, is especially some of those former 5-stars from a year ago. That was such a loaded class, and some of those guys, considering who they were sitting behind, and then Quindarius Robinson too. How can they kind of take the mantle, and who knows what he's learned from Will Anderson, Dallas Turner, and Chris Braswell. I think those are pretty good guys to watch, and then kind of take the baton from. But from an inside linebacker perspective, Tony, you like Alabama in this area, and maybe one of the better areas and more known commodities coming back with Deontay Lawson and Jod Campbell. Big expectations there for that part of the defense.
Yeah, it's got to be the strength of this defense, right? Because you return your two starters from last year, and they're two really good guys. I mean, Jahad Campbell made a lot of jumps last year. I think he's a guy that is uber athletic, can do everything you want on the field. We saw the play he made, the fumble recovery he made against Tennessee, but he can make a ton of plays. He can go sideline to sideline. The same with Lawson. And Lawson's, I think, going to be a real big leader on this team as well. So to have them as the Mike, and I guess we call it the Sting now, or Stinger, linebackers, I think that's going to be really key. The depth behind them, they got some young guys that maybe need to step up if one of those two goes down. But when you look at starting, I think Deontay Lawson and Jahad Campbell, that's going to be so important too, because when you look at some of the holes, and we'll get to that when we get to the secondary, you're going to need guys that are stable and don't need the extra help, and can kind of take care of their own, because there's going to be a lot of growing pains on this defense. And to have a position group like inside linebacker where you don't have to worry about it almost, I think is going to be really great for Kane Womack in his first year. And he's going to be
Yeah,
overseeing that position too. So like, not only do you have your most stable position, it's like now you have your defensive coordinator looking over it. I think that could be really big.
yeah. I think that's a good match, and it's going to be exciting to see what Womack kind of does. And you're going to be able to talk to him and all those position coaches to sort of get to know that roster more. But yeah, that does feel like, I think you made a good point. That feels like the area that is the most stable, but could be the most kind of screwed up if one of those two gets hit with an injury. So that is definitely, we'll have to see kind of who emerges as depth there, and potentially not, of course, wishing injury on anybody, but you obviously never know with the game of football. Finishing in the secondary, Tony. This is an area of questionability for sure. With where Alabama, kind of lost players. Obviously, Kool-Aid McKinstry and Terrihan Arnold going to the draft. Of course, Caleb Downs being the most significant departure into the transfer portal from the Saban retirement sort of saga, and everyone, questions around who would leave, who would stay. He ends up going to Ohio State. The Crimson Tide bringing in Colin Hitchler and Mo Lindquist, named, not only co-defensive coordinators, but they're going to take the secondary together. What's kind of just the overview? I mean, I don't know if there's a super specific question to dive into with this unit, considering what was lost. What's the situation there? Who's going to step up? Who are going to be names that Alabama fans need to know right now to break out into spring camp with these two at the helm now?
Yeah, I'm kind of in a similar situation with tackle, where I don't know if one of Alabama's starting cornerbacks is on the team yet. Because currently you'd look at it and you'd have, probably Damani Jackson. I mean, he's the only guy that really has the only true cornerback that has any starting experience, or really any experience at all. He's coming from Southern California, where he started last year. He kind of had an up and down season last year, but he does have that experience. He is a 5-star talent. So you would think that, like, right off the bat from cornerback, he gets one of the spots. I mean, obviously he's got to earn it, but I think, he would probably get one of the spots. But after that, there's not another current Alabama cornerback, like true corner, that has any college experience in terms of snaps. You return a redshirt freshman in Jaleel Hurley, but he did not play last year. So it's Jaleel Hurley and three freshmen, and you've got Jalen Mbakwe, who's a 5-star talent, Zay Mincy, Xavier Brown. All three of those guys are uber talented guys who will probably end up being starters on Alabama's secondary in the future. Are they ready to step in, year one at the cornerback position? That's really tough. So at the moment, I would go Damani Jackson and Jaleel Hurley. I'd give it to Hurley because he's had an extra year of college under his belt. But I kind of think that Alabama is going to be able to bring in a more established veteran, kind of like what they did with Trey Amos or Jalen Key last spring after spring camp. I think they're going to bring in somebody like that, and that's probably who will be your second cornerback. The star position is now called the Husky. There's a lot of ways Alabama could go with that. I think you could go with Malachi Moore, where he returns. It's probably Alabama's biggest off-season win, is that Malachi Moore returned, because I think you need that kind of versatility and that leadership in the secondary with how many pieces they have to fill. So he's the guy that played star, or with this husky role, whatever you want to call it, at Alabama. But I actually like the idea of dropping Malachi Moore back to safety, where he can kind of call the defense better and kind of organize things from the back. So, in my depth chart, I'm moving him back to a deep safety role. I think that opens up the door for it. They got Michigan transfer Keon Sabb. He's a guy that could play that husky role. Tony Mitchell's a guy that could play that husky role. One of those guys I think could really. They're both bigger guys. You're going to want a safety that can also cover in that role, but a safety that can hit a running back on the second level. Bang buddies with a tight end. You want that kind of guy. I think Tony Mitchell, I think Keon Sabb can both do that. So I'll go with one of those at the husky role. And then then you got Malachi Moore back. And I think you probably pair him with somebody like Devontae Smith. So maybe Malachi Moore at that strong safety, which we're calling a rover, and then Devontae Smith at that free safety where he can kind of play center field. And all of a sudden, I think that that defense kind of balances out. But I think you really need to answer the question at cornerback before everything can kind of play out the way it's supposed to. And that looks great too. That secondary, there's not a lot of of experience depth behind it. You're gonna have a lot of true freshmen behind the group that I just mentioned. So even if you wanted to give a starting job to one of those freshman corners, let's say he just kills it, Zay Mincy or whatever, just kills it in the spring, I think you still want to bring in a veteran guy at the cornerback position because there's just not a lot of depth there.
Yeah.
And this is going to be a longer season. If Alabama makes the college football playoff, it's going to be even longer. I just think that you need to add another guy in the secondary during the spring window. But that's kind of how I see it playing out. Really got to answer the cornerback position. I think they're a little bit better set at safety than maybe some people might think.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, and I think it'll be interesting what they do with Malachi Moore and that safety position, and yeah, it'll be them learning a new scheme as well and playing those new roles, whether it's the rover, the husky. Do they have to change the husky to like the elephant now? Are they gonna have to
The
like?
husky, actually, that terminology comes from Kane.
Oh yeah, I guess that's Kane. It's not
Or
DeBoer, is
it
it?
wasn't,
Yeah,
yeah, it's just, there is a
just
lot
Kane.
of dog-centric names, though. I mean, because you've got, like, a husky and a wolf. So you'd think that almost this terminology comes uh,
Right.
from DeBoer, but I think, yeah, I guess you could call it an elephant. Is there like a elephant
It's not
sounds
very
way too long.
fast.
Yeah,
Yeah,
elephant sounds way too long, and it's not fast. Yeah, like, I don't know. What if
something.
you called it, like, the tusk, though? I like that.
Oh, that could be fun.
Like, it's not an
The tusk.
animal, but, like, I don't know. You need
I
somebody.
think it's like yeah, you like dog though, because it's like they have they got that dog in them. It's like
That's
you
true,
know,
yeah.
it's more of a
What
connotation
if you
of
just
like
like, well, you could do
strength.
like, like, I don't know, like there's certain things about elephants that you could like, get like what are your bandits like the trunk? You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. Like I'm just spitballing here, but yeah.
There you
What if we
go.
just like broke apart an elephant and that's how they named the defense?
It's just the portions of an elephant. There you
Yeah.
go. Yeah, Crimson Tide doesn't exactly lend itself to good terminology, as iconic of a name as it
Ah, see,
is.
but
But
I don't even know. Like maybe like I don't know.
the
Is your
Tide, the wave,
yeah? I was gonna say like does your weak side linebacker become the wave? Like weak
the
wave?
wave,
Yeah, I don't know. You know.
sideline to sideline. I don't know. Someone needs to that needs to be a position. I don't know. Some staffer will come up with those titles. Figure it out. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah,
like a high
that's
tide, low tide kind of safety. Like a yeah, I like it.
That's turning into this is just a future podcast in of itself. We just
We're
rename
just
every single
renaming Alabama's
position.
positions based off
Yeah,
of mascot. That's
based
really
off of
yeah.
mascots. Yeah, that's solid. Well, yeah. So there's a breakdown, everything you kind of want to watch for as spring camp gets rolling. Tony's gonna have it all for you. So subscribe to Tide Illustrated. He'll be diving into everything, sinking his teeth into the new opportunity for himself to talk to more coaches and be living at the Malmore practice facility from here on in. So yeah, with that, subscribe to the site, subscribe here on YouTube if you're watching, follow on Spotify. We'll have everything spring camp for you here on Tide Illustrated.